in for a real treat today.
Your speaker today, Don Yeager,
is a master storyteller known around the world.
As one of the most respected
and acclaimed writers of all time.
Don Yeager has written 30 books,
featuring 12 New York Times bestsellers,
including the one he wrote with a two-time World Series champion catcher who looks a little bit like me.
Don's books, including the one he wrote with me, have sold more than 7 million copies and have been translated into dozens of languages.
Don began his career at a newspaper in Texas
and rose to become associate editor of Sports Illustrated magazine, and that's how I met him.
Hey, few people can really experience the kind of exciting resume that Don has had. He's a PTPer, baby.
In his 30 years as a journalist, he's worked with some of the greatest champions of our time.
Michael Jordan, Mia Hamm, Serena Williams, and even the All Blacks of New Zealand.
While Don's stories may come from the world of sports,
his lessons are universal and can be applied to each of our lives.
Don also serves as the executive coach for business leaders around the world.
And I can promise you, what he says and what he does will have an impact on your life.
You have to catch him hosting his popular podcast, Corporate Competitor.
That was a wonderful interview. It really was one of the really fun ones I've done. Really different. It was great.
It's good to see you. Over the years, we've become good friends.
He's been a guest on just about every major national television show, from Nightline to Good Morning America to Oprah.
This is Don Yeager, who did that article I was telling you about that's in Sports Illustrated on newsstands now. You should really get it if you're a parent who has a child who's in sports.
He lived with my father, Walter Payton, writing his autobiography while Dad courageously battled cancer.
He even met with the President of the United States in the Oval Office.
Using lessons learned throughout his Hall of Fame career.
Don shares the formula he has seen in great teams he's worked with,
and explains how those lessons can make your team better.
Like I said, you're in for a real treat.
He's awesome, baby, with a capital A.
Now, please welcome my friend.
My friend.
My friend.
Now, please welcome my friend, Don Yeager.
Awesome. Now, tell me the truth, though. How much more fun would that introduction have been if our good friend Bob had just stood up here and been Dick Vitale for a minute and 40 seconds? I'm sure Bob would have been a better Dick Vitale than Dick Vitale. Great teams. What makes the great teams great? Why are some teams, organizations, companies capable of being best in class year after year after year? Why do some do it while others rise and fall? Well, my deep dive into this subject began a little more than a decade ago. I'd retired from Sports Illustrated, been out talking to companies and organizations about what I had learned about individual high performance. Why are some individuals capable of being regularly at the top of their game? When a company executive grabbed me and said, by the way, we love that conversation, but what we really want to talk about is why are some teams able to do it when others can't? So I was fascinated, started looking at it, and I started asking myself the question, if I could go learn who it is that are the best-in-class organizations and what they teach, who would I want to go learn from? So I actually did what an old-school guy like me does. I grabbed a yellow pad and I drew a line down the middle, and I started asking myself, if I could pick great teams, who would I want to learn from? So I'd love to ask you, if on the left side of the page was sports teams, I started thinking, who in the world of sports would I want to go learn from as a team about high performance? If you had that left side of the page blank, give me some sports teams that you would want to study. Give me a name.
Lions.
Who? The Lions?
Detroit Lions.
This year. Okay, that's good. I mean, like, we're talking extended excellence. I mean, I'm sorry, I get it. I like them, they're great, but we're talking, sorry. UCLA Bruins, absolutely. The Chiefs, there you go. The Patriots, good. Sorry, Lions people. But there are, yes, the teams I kept finding more and more organizations. But the other side of the page, I wanted to look and think about what companies, what organizations, what non-sporting teams I'd want to learn from. So if you had to pick a few of those organizations, companies, maybe even a not-for-profit who you know to be regularly high-performing, give me some names of companies you'd be interested in. Walmart, you guys are all sucking up, but don't worry. But don't worry, I did too. I put Walmart on here. No, I'm just joking. But I started asking myself, who would be those companies? But as I kept asking the question, there was one team that kept coming up in the conversation. One team that I would argue is the greatest collection of talent ever to wear the same jersey. Officially, they were known as the 1992 USA men's national basketball team, Barcelona Olympics. But we all know them as the Dream Team, right? See, 3 years earlier, the International Olympic Committee had actually changed its rules, allowing every country in the world to bring its best talent to the Olympics. It did not matter if they were professionals or amateurs. And the United States was committed that year to sending its very best. The United States players were so good that even the world competition knew them by single names. They knew they were going to get a chance to play against Larry and Magic and Michael. The team was so good that its opponents actually became its fans. Now, I love this picture here. This is the Lithuanian national basketball team up there in the upper right. They've just been beaten by 51 points. But they raced to the United States sidelines so that they could take what was a 1992 version of a selfie, right? They just wanted a picture to prove they were on the same court. In fact, my favorite picture from that game, though, is this one here. This is the Lithuanian team captain. He came to the game with a camera hidden in his sock so that during the game he could take it out and take pictures of United States players playing against his buddies. That, by the way, is when you know you built a really great team, right? When your opponent is essentially reduced to sitting on the sidelines taking pictures of you. Well, that team did everything that was expected of it. High things were demanded of it, but they went through that tournament, defeated every nation in the world that they were asked to face by an average margin of 43 points. Again, no team in history has ever done anything like it in the sport in the Olympics. But, you know, what happens? What happens when high expectations are set for your organization, when you set goals and you actually achieve them? What is expected next? More, usually more, right? And in fact, over the next 2 Olympic tournaments, more came the United States' way. They went on to win 2 more gold medals. But in those 2000 games, just 8 years removed from having beaten the Lithuanian team by 51, in the quarterfinals of that tournament, they faced those same Lithuanians. And this time, the Lithuanians lost by 2. And they actually had a shot at the buzzer to win. USA Basketball had done what happens to so many organizations, right? They'd gotten full of themselves. They believed that the competition just should roll over when we walk on the court because we're that good. And it completely unraveled just 2 years later. 2 years later, in the World Championships of Basketball, which are essentially the Olympics in the off years, USA Basketball sent 13 NBA All-Stars to that tournament and finished 6th in the world. It went from Dream Team to 6th in the world in just a decade. You know, in the years since I retired from Sports Illustrated, one of my favorite things to do is there are media organizations out there that believe as I do that there are great lessons we can learn from sports. You don't have to be a sports fan to recognize there are lessons there in those games and those competitions that we can grow from. And my favorite sports section to read and write for over the last decade has been the sports section at the Wall Street Journal. Now, a lot of people laugh when I say that because most people don't recognize that the Wall Street Journal actually has a sports section. But it's one page every day. It's a one-page sports section in the Wall Street Journal. But those of us who write for it are challenged to find stories from sports that can apply into the lives of business leaders, entrepreneurs, people who are trying constantly to better themselves. What can we learn from sports? Well, the sports editor at the Journal knew at the time that I had been out talking about individual high performance, what we could learn from great winners, but he was fascinated by a book I was writing at the time. A book on teams, the book that we're talking about here. He believes, as I do, that success leaves clues, right? And that if we want to be better at anything, you want to be a better leader, you want to be a better provider in your whatever it is that you're trying to do, Go find success and seek its clues. That led a journey for me that took almost 7 years, where I traveled all around the world. I wanted to go learn, whether it was from Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide, or the women's soccer team at North Carolina that's won 21 national championships. I wanted to study a small team, and I ended up spending a week and a half with the 2-person women's volleyball team of Misty May Traynor and Carrie Walsh Jennings. These 2 women were best in the world for 15 years, and they went through unbelievable challenges in order to be able to stay best in class. I ended up going halfway around the world, where the rugby team of New Zealand asked me to come study them as well. Teams in Sri Lanka and England, all these teams were interested. They wanted to be studied and compared against the very best. But I also recognized, as I said earlier, that you needed to start looking at businesses. So I did. I started paying attention to the organizations that I saw were consistently outperforming the marketplace. What were they doing? And what I found was that there was, in fact, a formula that winning teams lean into, a formula for success. You know, too often we do feel like our formula it's focused on profit or margin, whatever it might be. But I will tell you, the greatest teams, the best organizations out there are hyper-focused, as Bob talked this morning, on culture. They're hyper-focused on this idea of how do we create an environment that gives us a competitive advantage, because they know that if they create the right culture, if they gather the right people and they're all heading in the right direction, behaviors follow. Culture leads to better behaviors. Behaviors that are recognized within that culture are followed. Those behaviors lead to habits, and the great leaders will tell you habits. It is the habits that come from this formula that lead to ultimate success. In some way, shape, or form, this sentence came up in every interview I did on high-performing organizations. They said the culture of your team happens by design or default. It's either going to happen because you encourage it, because you incentivize it, because you ask others and you let them know why it matters, or it happens because you sit back and let it happen to you, and no great organization lets it happen by accident. Well, you know, unfortunately, culture as a word has almost become too much of a buzzword. It's overused at times, I think. Nobody wants to work in a bad culture. Everybody just culture. So I actually wanted to make sure, working with these leaders, that we could define it in a way that made sense to everyone. And so here was the definition we came up to. That culture is the values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that are acceptable in your team's environment. So you don't say, for example, that we start everything right on time if everybody in the organization knows you're always 6 minutes late, right? It's not what you say, it's what is acceptable and what happens on a regular basis. It becomes ultimately the common language of your team. And that culture is often driven, the best cultures are often driven by an understanding of an organization's history as well. You know, I love that Bob began today, and then as I understand it, I was not here last year, but he begins these conversations by talking to you all about how all this came together, why this room is filled with the people that it is, why the relationship with Walmart began, how it began. You know, so I'd love to ask, one of the greatest cultures that I had the chance to study over the course of working on this was the United States Marines. I will tell you, there is something just so completely fascinating about what it means to become and be a Marine, right? You are never not a Marine, right? So I'd love to ask, first off, is there a Marine in the room? Do we have a Marine in the room? Is there anybody here by any chance? Not one, and I can't. The lights are a little bright, so if there is, I'm not seeing it. But it's fascinating to me that if you meet a Marine and you enter into a conversation with them, you ask any Marine on the planet, any Marine, and you ask them, what is the birth date of the United States Marines? And every Marine knows that the birth date of that branch of service is November 10th, 1775. Why do they know that? Because the history of the organization is so important to them that every Marine on the planet, on November 10th of every year, they actually put on their best and they go to a birthday party. They celebrate the history of their organization. They gather to talk about why they came together and why what they do matters. I love that because I think, again, as Bob was trying to do with you, he's trying to make sure that as Prime Pursuits continues to grow its imprint, as it continues as you all continue to build the influence of the organization, that you never forget why it started, because it's the reason that it began that will continue to give everything you do here life. Well, out of all of that came a book on high-performing teams, a book that I had the opportunity to write, as I said, a number of years ago. And what I discovered in the writing of that book was that there were 16 habits that came up most frequently when the best teams came together to win together. 16 habits that show up most frequently in those opportunities. Now, I will tell you, I saw a few of you there snapping pictures, so I'm gonna offer one of the things that Bob and I talked about was that to make today's presentation a little easier, I took those 16 habits and key slides, key quotes from today's presentation, put them on a couple of pages, and if you hit that QR code, number one, I'll send you the 2 pages so that you'll have those for your use as you go back to your team. But secondly, I'll also send you a link to a podcast interview I got to do with Bob about the creation of Prime Pursuits, 44 Farms, and how it all came together. So hopefully that QR code, which will be available on several future slides, will be an opportunity for you to be able to take a little something away from today that will make your team better. Well, as I said, 16 characteristics as we were looking at it, but there was one. There was one characteristic that came up almost every time I interviewed leaders of great teams. And it was that the best teams don't just know their sense of purpose. They don't just know why what they do matters. That's great. The best teams feel why what they do matters. They actually have a strong sense of connection to purpose. You know, it was fun. I listened earlier as Ryan and the Walmart team was up here talking about, and I love that line when he says, "We're feeding America," right? It's easy. We could reduce it and say that's it. That's our sense of purpose. But sometimes we forget that it's as important to know it as it is to feel it. That's why I loved, that bringing Jeremy up here. I mean, that idea, right, that you're getting a chance not just to sit in the presence of each other, but to have customers talk to you about what it means to do what you're doing. So as I started looking at that, I went back, and the editor of the Wall Street Journal said, "Here's your assignment." He said, you talk a lot about this dream team. We want to know, how does a team go from being the best of all time, that 1992 team, to a decade later finishing 6th in the world? But more importantly, how do they find their way back? I loved it because in some way that's all of us, right? All of us maybe are best in class today. Maybe we have been. Maybe we've slipped a little bit. Maybe we've got to find our way back. There's somewhere in that journey that's good for each and every one of us. So I took the assignment, went to Las Vegas, where my first interview was with the CEO of USA Basketball, a guy by the name of Jim Tooley. Jim has been CEO of the United States basketball program for more than 30 years now. So he was there during the Dream Team window. He was there when they fell to 6th in the world, and he's there today as the team won the Olympics, as you might remember from last summer when they beat France in the gold medal game. And I asked Jim, I said, I want to talk mostly about that period when you had 13 All-Stars on a team and you lost to Puerto Rico. Like, how did that happen? How do you finish 6th in the world with that much talent? He said, I'll tell you exactly what happened. He said, the awe factor was gone. He said, there was a window of time when everybody wanted to work with us. They wanted to be part of our team. Everybody dreamed of playing with us. And pretty soon, we got so full of ourselves that they spent their time no longer wishing to be with us, but to beat us. And they started catching up, and we didn't adjust. What a great lesson, right? When you listen to what Doug was talking about up here, right? The CEO of Walmart, talking about the adjustments and the things that he's constantly having to make as the organization is continuing to think about customer behavior and how those things are going to shape each and every one of our lives. You have to learn, as Jim Tooley was saying there, to adjust, and USA Basketball didn't do that. But in that moment, USA Basketball had an opportunity. and they changed leadership. They found a new executive leader. They hired a guy right here in Phoenix named Jerry Colangelo. He was the owner of the Phoenix Suns. He's a basketball lifer, and he knew his most important hire as the new leader of the USA Olympic program was going to be the head coach. Who was going to actually lead the team onto the court every day? Who was going to have to inspire these players? And he made a very unconventional choice. At the time, every player on the team was an NBA player. So everybody thought he was going to hire an NBA coach. But he chose a college coach, a coach named Mike Krzyzewski. Coach K, for most people who cannot pronounce his last name, right? Coach K, he said, was the right guy for 3 reasons. First, he'd been an assistant on the Dream Team, so he knew what it meant to actually inspire, and be part of all that egocentric athletic moment. Secondly, yes, he was a college coach, but he was, at the time, the only college coach that had won 5 national championships. Only John Wooden has won more than that. But he said the third and most important reason that Mike Krzyzewski was the right person for the job is that Mike Krzyzewski played his college basketball and began his college coaching career at West Point. He knew what it meant to wear the letters USA stitched onto his chest, and he knew what it meant to value the country that he was getting a chance to represent. Coach K came in to take the job, and he did what he would argue any leader should do in a new transition. In a moment of transition, you get an opportunity, new role is offered to you. He would argue that your first job is to go on what he argued was a listening tour. He called it a listening tour. He went to talk not just to the players, the people he was going to lead. He talked to people who had left the team. He talked to his predecessors, those who had the job before him, because he wanted to understand the culture of what he was walking into. And Mike Krzyzewski came out of that learning session with a couple of big ahas. The first was, in his opinion, every team on the planet, his team, your team, every team on the planet can essentially be divided into 2 buckets, right? The first bucket are your patriots. They believe in what you're doing. They want to be part of what you're doing. They wake up every day wanting to help you achieve what it is that you are out there to do. But the second bucket are your mercenaries. And those are the people that are working for you until someone down the street offers them $1 more. And unfortunately, as Coach K was starting to look at the team that was constructed for him, he discovered he was overly populated by mercenaries. He had too many players who were actually on the team and would openly say they were on the team because Nike was paying them to wear their shoes in international competitions. And the swoosh on the bottom of their foot meant more to them than the 3 letters on their chest. Well, Coach K tried to figure out, how do you do that? How do you turn around an organization where you might have too many mercenaries, too many people who are driven by the wrong sense of purpose? And so he decided on his first trip as the head coach to try something new. And on the way to Japan, where the team was playing in his first ever international tournament, he diverted the roster, and for 2 days he took the team to Korea, where he wanted them to live, eat, breathe, practice with the young men and women stationed on the DMZ, young men and women looking across a border at someone with ill intentions for them. He wanted the USA players to meet those young men and women who were wearing the same 3 letters on their jersey, but for a far different reason. Well, in that moment, actually, those players had an unbelievable experience. And several of them, one of them actually, Chris Paul actually shared with me that it was the first time he'd ever spent that much time in the presence of others who cared about people beyond themselves more than they did themselves. But that team also came up with a new habit. You know, many of us have experienced athletes. We've watched them, especially those Detroit Lions, just joking. But if they score a touchdown or a big basket is scored, what does the athlete? They pound their chest. They point to the name on the back of their jersey because this is about me and I'm pretty awesome, right? Well, that team, when a big basket was scored, the first thing the player who scored did was turn to the nearest camera to salute. because they wanted to send a message back to the young men and women in Korea to say thank you for teaching us that today we're actually part of something bigger than ourselves. The players were beginning to realize that they were part of a mission, not a basketball team. Well, Coach K called what was created there a feel it moment. It's where you feel who you serve. It's where you feel why what you get to do is a special experience. But one of the other things he learned was that feel it moments don't last, right? It's awesome. We get to have it. We get to watch a video. We get to experience something, but it doesn't last. And so he realized he needed to create more of them. And the next year, he decided when the team came in to hand every player a handful of USA Basketball dog tags with their names and their details on the dog tag. And the players were told to wear these dog tags year-round, and every time they were in a hotel lobby or an airport hangar and they got a chance to encounter a member of the United States Armed Forces, our players were asked to go approach the soldier, ask his or her story, and at the end of the conversation, ask if they could swap dog tags. And if you watch that team for the next decade, the last thing every player did before they took the court was they took from their neck the dog tags they had been collecting, because that's who they were playing for. The next year, Coach decided to actually start bringing in members of the Wounded Warrior Project to talk to the team about what it meant to sacrifice, what it meant to be willing to do whatever it took in service of protecting each other. The year after that, he actually started a relationship with a charitable organization called TAPS. TAPS works on behalf of children who lost parents in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. And these children would be brought to practices with their heroes, these USA Basketball players. They would be brought to exhibition games with the players. And at the end of the practice, at the end of the game, whatever it was, the players would line up at the midcourt line. The children would line up at the free throw line. And then each child would get a chance to tell the players a story about their mother or father. And the children were all given buttons with pictures of them and their parents on the button, and they would walk down the line and they would hand the buttons to each player, and the players would wear the buttons because that's who they were playing for. And then in the year that I was working on this story for the Wall Street Journal, Coach decided that his feel it moment for that year was to take the team back to his old stomping ground at West Point. He wanted the players to understand what it meant to become a commissioned Army officer through that institution. I was there with the team during that day, and actually during the day, several players said to me, you know what, everybody thinks I'm one of the best athletes in the world, that I can achieve and do just about anything. You throw me in that wave pool with waves slapping over your head with an 85-pound pack on my back, I would sink to the bottom. Players said, you know what, you think I'm one of the great athletes, you asked me to run the obstacle course I just watched, that I probably don't succeed. At the end of the day, I'm back there's a hotel on the West Point campus, and with several of the players, and I'll admit to you, we're sitting there in the bar. We're there in the bar, and actually there was an assignment that night. I was going to end up in a conversation with Coach K about the day, what the day looked like. Phone rings, he invites me to come up to his room, and the conversation was simple. What were you trying to achieve by bringing these players here to experience West Point today? Let me let you listen in on a short snippet of that interview.
Most of our guys, it was something new. One, they had never been to West Point. Two, they had never been around that many people who had dedicated their lives to selfless service. I mean, you weren't just putting your toe in the water. You basically did a cannonball into the pool of feeling.
Right.
It had that impact on our team. It was where you actually witnessed selfless service, sacrifice, commitment, honor, trust, all these things at the highest level, and you're around it all day, and you end up feeling those things. And then as a result, you feel deeper about being a representative of United States basketball.
He wanted the players to feel. He wanted them to feel how lucky they were to get a chance to represent, not play basketball, but to represent something bigger than themselves. We talk about that all the time, right? We want our employees, we want those who work for us to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. We have to make them feel it, was Coach K's lesson. But if you ask anybody associated with USA Basketball about the feel it moment Coach created, that still reverberates, that still is a conversation point within the halls of USA Basketball. It's a moment on the eve of the Olympics in London. The team was preparing to fly to London, and Coach asked them to gather with him a day early in Washington, D.C., and he took them to Arlington National Cemetery. The day began with three of our best: Kevin Durant, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, being afforded the opportunity to present the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And shortly after that ceremony, General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looked at the players and their families and said, "Would you come with me? I want to walk you through Arlington. I want to tell you stories." After about 30 minutes, General Dempsey looked at the players and said, "I'd like you to come with me a little further. I want to take you to Section 60. Section 60 at Arlington are the freshest graves in that cemetery. They're where the men and women who have most recently given their lives for protection of United States interests are laid to rest." As the players were walking through that section, they were looking down at headstones, birth dates younger than theirs, hometowns they recognized. And pretty soon, no one knew exactly what to do. The players ended up huddled together. No one was saying a word. And right about then, Coach Krzyzewski saw a young man standing about 150 feet away. He was dressed in civilian clothes. He had a crew cut. Coach assumed him to be a member of the military. He was standing there with a backpack slung over his shoulders, and he was amongst a group of graves, and he was moving from grave to grave, reaching in the backpack, pulling out pictures and laying them on the ground. Coach walked over, and he said, "Excuse me, sir. My name is Mike Krzyzewski. I am the head men's basketball coach for the Olympic team, and I'm wondering if you would share with me what you're doing here today." The young man looked back and he said, "Coach, I know who you are." He said, "This was my team." He said, "We had a mission. Didn't go as planned. But these are pictures of me and them in better days." And Coach said, "Sir, would you come talk to my players?" And he did. He walked over and he stood in the center of that collection of basketball royalty, and he started talking about what it meant to care for each other, what it meant to be willing to do whatever it took to protect each other. And after a couple of minutes, he started talking about survivor's guilt. Said he wasn't there the day it happened, but he wished he had been. And at that moment, he started to cry, and he turned and he walked away. After a couple of minutes, Mike Krzyzewski leaned in and he said, "Gentlemen, this is why we came here today. Because I want you to feel what it means to represent the United States of America." That team went to London and destroyed the world. Outside of the Dream Team, it's the greatest collection of wins any one basketball team has put on a series of opponents. They went there because they felt something completely different. Actually, Kevin Durant, who was one of those players, actually said to me, he said, "You know what, Don, I grew up in Baltimore. When I was a kid, we had field trips to Arlington. I never went. I skipped school on those days because I didn't want to go hang out at a cemetery." He said, "But after that day, I never put my jersey on the same way." See, Mike Krzyzewski believes that every great team feels its why. We don't just know that we're feeding America. Sometimes we have to get out there and we have to get that experience. We have to be reminded of how important what we get the chance to do is. And by the way, this means more today than it ever has. It's I'm amazed. I'm not an expert on the Gen Z or millennial generations. If you're a speaker, every once in a while you get phone calls to your office of people saying, "Hey, look, we've got something." I get calls every once in a while where somebody says, "Can you help us with the millennial problem?" I'm thinking, man, if you're calling it the millennial problem, you're already screwed, right? It's already a bad deal for you. But while I'm not an expert on it, I have studied it because I try to understand what it is, our future workforce, right? What are they going to look like? So this amazed me. These statistics amazed me. Forbes actually did an incredible study a couple of years ago in which they, first off, the number they stood out to me was that 3/4 of the workforce in just 5 years from now, 3/4 of the workforce that we will employ will come from one of those two generations. Pretty amazing. But the other thing that happened in this Forbes study was they went and interviewed 100,000 members of those two generations and asked them essentially two questions. Why do you work where you work? And in a zero unemployment world, why do you stay? Why do you stay where you work today? And what they discovered was that the number one motivator for millennials, the number two for Gen Z, is that they want to work someplace where they believe what they're doing is making a difference. And they need to feel it. They need to know it. It's interesting when you think about what we've been through over these last few years, right? As it means to be entrepreneurs, as people of hiring others, right? I mean, some of you might remember it wasn't that long ago, right, that we had the Great Resignation. You remember that, when everybody was going to quit because they were going to go get a better job. There was a better job out there for everybody. And then shortly after the Great Resignation, I loved it. The next one was quiet quitting. You remember that, where they didn't quit, but they kind of quit on you anyway, right? My favorite, though, is the one that is kind of the big hashtag on TikTok today, where everybody talks about it. It's called grumpy staying, right? I'm not gonna leave. I'm just gonna be grumpy all the time. And but what are all of these employees saying to us? Is that what they really, those who work for us, what they really want is they want to be able to. How do you combat disengagement? How do you combat that idea that they're not that fired up about what we're asking them to do every day? We get them to feel why what they do matters. I also want to make sure that it's clear this isn't just a sports story. I've had the good fortune over the last 9 years to serve on the national board of a charity called the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Many of you might be familiar with Make-A-Wish. We grant wishes to children who have life-threatening illnesses and their families. My relationship with Make-A-Wish actually began a number of years ago. I wrote a book for them where I sat down with 25 of the greatest athletes on the planet who regularly grant wishes to children, and I asked each athlete to tell me about the wish they granted that most changed them, the wish that had the greatest impact on them. I'm going to say, who was it that said New England Patriots earlier? Where was the New England Patriots person? Somewhere right here, right over there. There we go. So I will share you one quick story out of this because it was a kind of a fun one. It's a story that has to do with a guy. He was a former quarterback. You have to check the waiver wire every day. You never know when Tom Brady might come out of retirement again. But he was a former quarterback named Tom Brady. Some of you might remember him. Tom Brady inspires a lot of people have very strong opinions about Tom Brady. They like him, they don't. I will tell you, Tom Brady, I like him because the guy grants some of the greatest wishes I've ever seen granted to children through the Make-A-Wish program. So reach out to Brady. We're talking about the idea that he grants wishes. He wanted to be part of the book. And he said, by the way, I've got a wish that I'm granting next Thursday. Why don't you come to Boston and you can experience it with me? So it was a pretty cool day. It was kind of an emotional day for me because Brady was granting a wish to a 4-year-old little girl named Madeline. Now, Madeline is emotional for me. My little girl's name is Madeline, and on that day, she was also 4 years old. But this Madeline had spent 2.5 of her 4 years in hospitals battling cancer. But on that day, she was cancer-free, and she wanted to meet Tom Brady. I went to breakfast with Madeline and her mother. That's her mother there in the red. I went to breakfast with Madeline and her mother, and I'm sitting there with her, and I said, Madeline, you are 4 years old. Why do you want to meet Tom Brady? And she looked at me and she said, I have waited my whole life to meet Tom Brady. And I spent a little more time with Madeline's mom, and I realized who had waited her whole life to meet Tom Brady. But we get to the field, and Tom Brady grants a most extraordinary wish. For 3 hours, these two rolled in the grass, and they threw footballs to each other, and they told the stupidest jokes, and they were just having a blast. And finally, the wish is getting ready to come to its close. This picture was actually taken by the Boston Globe. It ran on the front page of the newspaper the next day. But as the wish is coming to its close, Tom Brady reaches around, he hands Madeline a football. Now, no one measured the inflation rate of the football. It was a little light. But as he hands it to her, Madeline's mother says, Madeline, wasn't there something you were going to say to Tom Brady before you left him? Now, by now, Madeline and Tom are like best friends, right? So Madeline gives her mom the stink eye, like, are you kidding me? You're going to call me out like this? And Tom Brady leans in, he goes, Madeline, what do you got for me? What were you going to say to me? She stuffs her fingers in her mouth, her cheeks are turning red, and she looks at Tom Brady and she goes, yeah, I said I was going to say, hubba hubba. Which turned Tom Brady's cheeks red. But the reason I share that with you is because at Make-A-Wish, you think about it, like you all know intuitively, and those who work for you know intuitively, you're feeding America. At Make-A-Wish, we know we're making a difference in the lives of families, but it doesn't matter. We still begin every day of every major meeting that we do at Make-A-Wish with what we call mission moments. Now, mission moments are where a family is invited to come stand in front of the room, in front of us, and tell us the story of their wish. Tell us about what it meant that day not to be a cancer kid, right? But to just be part of a family at Disney or whatever it might be. The mission moments, sometimes the families couldn't make it. Sometimes the families would make videos that they would send to us. Sometimes the CEO of the organization would just stand in the front of the room and read us letters from children. But whatever it was, 8 minutes. At the end of the 8 minutes, the lights would come up. We'd all be wiping tears from our eyes. And there isn't anything you couldn't ask me to give you that day because I feel the mission. I feel why it matters. Too often we get caught up in all the other things we have to do to make our work come to be, and we forget the importance of feeling why what we do matters. So, I want to close by just asking a couple of questions. First off, I'm going to hope, is everybody here, are we all convinced that no matter what kind of organization we run, no matter who we have in our employ, no matter how big or smaller, that if we could create moments, those kinds of opportunities for people to feel why and remember why what we do matters, that it makes a difference? Generally, everybody believes that. But the second question is often, Don, we're creating beef, man. We're like, well, how am I supposed to do that? So I'm going to share with you from working with Bob, from talking to some of you, from talking to those other organizations that are very successful in creating these kinds of moments, 3 ways that you can do exactly that. 3 ways as you leave here and you think about how you can go with your team and actually create some kind of a feeling environment that allows them to remember that they're actually part of something bigger than themselves. I want you to know these 3 ways. The first is what we call product impact, right? As we said earlier, it's pretty obvious. We know what our product is. We know its impact. We know that when we get a chance to create and deliver that product on a regular basis, that we are feeding America. That's great. But the bigger question is often not just, we think of our product as often who we sell our product to. The bigger question is often that question of the downstream beneficiary. Who is it that they sell it to? How is what we do, if we do it well, if we are creating really high, if we're best in class, what does that mean to the people who are at the end of the stream of the purchase process? How will it affect them? And how cool it is that even here at Prime, you guys thought about this idea of bringing, for example, Jeremy here to talk. Because those downstream beneficiaries are who our work truly matters to. You know, when I was trying to understand this, I went to find a guy who was well known in the world of business leadership for doing this very well. His name is Bill George. He was the longtime CEO of a medical device company called Medtronic. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Medtronic, but they make devices that are implanted in people that keep them alive, right? Think diabetes pumps, things like that. They keep people alive. Bill George, over the course of his leadership at that company, actually presided over its growth from 10,000 employees to 40,000 employees, and yet every year during that window, they were the best place to work in their industry. That's hard to do, right? To grow exponentially and stay a best place to work. So I went to Bill George. I said, how did you do that? What were some of the things? And he starts laying out a couple of ideas, but then he says, but there was one thing we started doing 20 years ago that changed the dynamic of our company. He said, every year we host, as we're doing here, some kind of a gathering of titans, right? A gathering of our leaders, gathering of those who are making a great difference in our company. He said, but every year, in those 3 days, 1 hour of the 3-day window is reserved for a period in which we bring to the stage 6 families. 6 families who are standing there today because a Medtronic device is keeping one of them alive. And then the microphone is handed to each one of the 6 families, and they are allowed to tell our employees how grateful they are for what it is that our employees are doing for them. He said every year, without fail, there's a young woman who steps to the front of the stage, and she says, thank you. Because your device does exactly what you promised, my father walked me down the aisle this summer. He said every year there's some young man that says, thank you. Because your device is exactly what you promised, what you agreed to make, my grandfather stands with us today, and everybody said 6 months ago he wouldn't. And Bill George said, but here's the key to that lesson. He said, we as a company do not sell to families. We sell to doctors and hospitals, but the families are whose lives we change, right? It is the downstream beneficiary of what we do, and the idea and the ability to be able to hear it. I said, Bill, you do this every year? He says, oh yeah. He said, in order to be successful, you have to constantly remind yourself why what you do has great purpose. What is it that allows, and how do you remind your team of that? Because it's so often we just get lost in the P's and Q's. The second one of these ways of doing so is really around community impact. You know, Doug McMillan was talking earlier about what Walmart did after the hurricanes in Florida and North Carolina. This idea that in every one of our spaces we have a special relationship with our community, whatever it might be. And there might be times, there are places where the community needs something from you, and too often it feels like companies and organizations are driven just to write a check, right? We're going to write a check because that makes it easy. But unfortunately, checks don't create feeling for those that work for you. What creates feeling is the opportunity to go do something in those moments. You know, Bob mentioned briefly at the beginning, I live in Tallahassee, Florida. And 5 years ago, there was a hurricane that came through the Gulf, and it was headed right toward Tallahassee, headed right toward where we are. But last minute, it slightly deviated. It went a little west, and it destroyed a little town called Marianna. And in that town, one thing I was not aware of until this happened was that of my 18 employees, and I don't have a big company, I have 18 employees, 3 of my 18 employees are from Marianna. And I did not know that their families had been through so much during that hurricane. So we decided as a company to shut down on a Friday. We actually all took our kids out of school and we went over to Marianna with rakes and chainsaws and just to spend Friday, Saturday, Sunday serving the people of Marianna, but to do it as a team, right? We ended up going and working at a food bank at the local church there. We ultimately ended up actually bringing in, you know, those big jumper houses that the kids play in, and we put them up in a local park so that kids, because this hurricane had hit over Halloween weekend, none of the kids in that town had a chance to experience Halloween. We went to try to create an experience, but we did it as a team. We helped that community, and we did so as a team. These moments sometimes pay themselves back. You don't do it for that, but sometimes they do. Last year, another hurricane came up the Gulf, and this one squarely hit my town. We were without power for 18 days. It was just a crazy amount of damage that was done. But when the hurricane hit, the very first email that my wife found when she opened up her email was from the pastor from that church saying, "Hey, what can we do to come over and serve you? How can we come help you out of what you're going through?" You know, these moments for our team, that ability to go serve the community, made such an incredible difference. It draws us together in ways that, as we said, if any of you have played sports, most sporting teams most people who've played sports will tell you they don't remember the wins or losses that greatly. What they do remember are the opportunities you had as a team to do something. And these moments are what we work to create through the community impact. But the third one is where we really get into it, and this is one where each and every organization can absolutely do this one. It's called teammate impact. It's what can you do in service of somebody who works for you? How can you help them achieve something that matters to them? And I'm not talking about financial, and I'm not talking about writing a check. I'm talking about what can you do to help a teammate make a difference in what they're looking to do. You know, as I mentioned, we're not a big company, but with 18 employees, one of the things we do is I sit down with every employee and at the beginning of the year, and we map out an entire year's strategy. What can I do? What can we do for every employee who works for us? One example, I don't know how many of you live in a town that has like an Adopt-A-Road program. Well, I didn't know. If you'll look at that picture there, the second guy in from the left, a guy named Danny Jordan, he's worked for me for 13 years. I had no idea that Danny Jordan, there's 2 miles of road in my community that are adopted by Danny Jordan in the names of his 2 sister-in-laws who both died of breast cancer. He walks in the heat of the summer, he walks and picks up cigarette butts on these roads because he wants the sister-in-law's names to be on signs and never to be forgotten in our local town. I didn't know that until I asked Danny Jordan what we could do. And Danny said, "You know what? Would you help me clean a road one day?" So we shut down one Friday afternoon, and 18 of us went out and walked 2 miles and picked up every cigarette. It's amazing what people throw out of their cars. But we picked up every cigarette butt, every nasty thing you could pick up on the side of these 2 miles of road. And because there were 18 of us, it went a lot faster than we anticipated, and we ended up in a margarita bar. But in that margarita bar, while we're sitting there, Danny Jordan got the chance to tell us about his 2 sister-in-laws and why he loved them so terrifically. You know, Danny Jordan gets offered jobs all the time because he's really good at what he does. But Danny Jordan doesn't want to leave because he knows he feels different about working with us because we feel different about working with him. We do things that allow him to recognize that what we do is different. You know, the best teams, they don't just know why they're part of the organization, they feel it. They feel that they're connected to those who work with them. They know that they're connected to something bigger than themselves. You know, we all worry about how you deal with those folks who get job offers and actually are worried about taking that next dollar down the street. It is how you create that environment for them that makes a difference. You know, in the time that Bob gave me to spend with you today, I wanted to, I know so much about so many of you because he shared stories with me about so many of you, how proud he is of the community that is being built here and the amazing things that so many of you are participating in to help make Prime Pursuits and what they're doing special. But I hope that our time, some way we would stay connected. I hope that if you'll hit that QR code, whatever it might be, we'll get that opportunity at some stage to stay connected and be able to continue to do that. But as I think through this, you know, there are a handful of things. I hope that as you leave here today, you'll remember a great team that found its why, right? That USA basketball team, how that came together. I hope you'll remember who your why matters to. And sometimes it's not who you sell to, it's who they sell to. Sometimes it's who is the end user of your product. I hope you'll remember to continue to study great teams, right? That you'll continue to look at, in this room, as Bob said, one of the great values of this community coming together, because it's so often that we're all siloed, right? We're all off doing our thing and we don't get a chance to talk to others, study others who are great, learn what we can, and then hopefully you'll find that feel it moment. Because if we do that, the one thing I know is that in no time at all, right, whoever it is that we consider an opponent will be on the sidelines taking pictures of you. Thank you all so very, very much.